There has been a ton of love and hate for the Nintendo Switch. It feels like half of the internet thinks this is the best system ever, and a lot of people completely despise it. And to me, by looking at a lot of these discussions, it feels like the biggest problem of the Switch has come down to its performance. The exclusives that Nintendo releases constantly get such high ratings. They have some of the biggest dominations on Metacritic. But the problem a lot of times just comes down to the fact that when Nintendo games are broken, it's bad frame rates, it's terrible pop-in, it's weird load times that don't seem to make sense. It feels like Nintendo definitely needs more power, which is why there has been the constant discussion of a possible Nintendo Switch Pro, a stronger console. But now, it seems as if we have confirmation that Nintendo built a Nintendo Switch Pro, and they've now secretly canceled it. But I want to talk about that. What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here. Hi, hope you're having a great day. If you could like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. So we're starting things off taking a look at this article over here on the insider.com, Insider Gaming, and they said this: a mid-gen Nintendo Switch was created, it was planned, but scrapped, it's claimed. Now, the source on this is actually very, very, very reputable. This was spoken about by John Lineman of Digital Foundry, and based on his information, he mentioned this on his latest podcast just yesterday. He said this: so I think at one point, internally, from what I can understand, talking to different developers, is that there was some sort of mid-generation Switch planned at one point, and it seems to be no longer happening. And thus, it's pretty clear that whatever we get next, it's probably going to be a next-gen hardware. Basically meaning we're probably going to get a Nintendo Switch 2 instead of a Nintendo Switch Pro. Now, I decided to actually listen to this podcast, and it sounds as if the problem that Nintendo ran into wasn't a lack of interest or a fear that the Switch Pro would not be successful. Apparently, Nintendo's concern came down to chips. Apparently, during the pandemic, there was just a bunch of concern about the idea that if they made a system that is so much more powerful than this thing, which is already taking up a lot of microchips during the microchip shortage, it sounds like they were a bit afraid about the idea of making a normal Nintendo Switch, a Nintendo Switch Pro, and having them side by side when competing with other consoles, other cars and stuff. A lot of people were trying to use the same microchips, and it sounds like maybe Nintendo was afraid that they would put too much power into too many separate cups and nobody would want to take a drink. Now, I personally find this to be incredibly fascinating because really, I just think it's interesting to think of the idea of what if they had dropped a more powerful Nintendo Switch. It seems like the original timeline was maybe to have the Switch Pro out or winter of 2020, and then obviously the pandemic kind of derailed all that. I think that would have been very, very, very cool, but it seems instead that their plan is to drop a big Nintendo Switch 2 instead. Now, according to John's sources in the podcast, he says that it sounds like this new Nintendo Switch console that's currently being done, this next-gen hardware, is probably not coming out in 2023. It's probably coming out maybe mid or early 2024 at the earliest, which still is a very long way off. Now, what kind of sticks in my mind is that this story itself, on its just face value, I thought was pretty basic. You know, it's like, okay, whatever, they're probably making a new Nintendo Switch. That completely makes sense. But what's weird is that a lot of Nintendo Switch lovers seem to be mad about the idea of the Nintendo Switch. I keep seeing people on Twitter, and no hate to anyone here or anything, but this guy like Juice Man is acting like nobody cares about a Nintendo Switch Pro. Like no average person even wants it. Look at this. The average person does not care for the Switch Pro. Like that just seems so interesting to me. Look at this. The average consumer could care less about more powerful hardware in the first place. If they cared, the Nintendo Switch would not sell. PCs have the highest level graphics, would be the best selling, and Steam Deck would be killing the Switch. Now, I want to make it clear again, I'm not hating on OJ or anything like that. I'm just saying that I kind of disagree with the fact that I do think that the Nintendo Switch Pro would have been a huge success for Nintendo. I think, honestly, just being able to have better resolution, better frame rate, even just the tiniest bit of upgrade, I think would have been a massive success. Because it does seem like the major sticking point for a lot of people is the fact that when you're playing this thing on a 720p screen, even with this OLED upgrade, it definitely seems like it lacks that visual punch of any other console. I mean, my PlayStation 4 Pro games, like last gen games I'm playing on my PS5, look infinitely better than these new games coming out on the Nintendo Switch. Now, I think it's interesting because right here, Mandy points out something that she says, I don't understand why some Nintendo peeps get mad about anything Switch Pro related. Like, it's a better Switch. I think the average consumer cares about that. I really agree with this. I really think that the Switch Pro, especially if they'd given it a better name than Switch Pro, I think the name Nintendo Switch Pro, like, that's obviously just our street term for it. I think if they'd called it the Super Nintendo Switch, I think that would have been a very big hit, especially if it tried to eventually replace the current model, the way that, we sort of got a PlayStation 4 Slim and then the PlayStation 4 Pro. I think it would have been really cool to see. I mean, honestly, just to see what performance boost they were trying to get. Now, from my own sources, from people I have heard through the grapevine myself, I do 1,000,000% believe that the Nintendo Switch was done. The Nintendo Switch Pro was actually fully created. They had dev kits. They were talking to different developers about what it was going to be, and then they just canned it. And to me, I guess that's still just baffling it all, is because companies do make stuff and cancel it all the time. I mean, actually, research and development is a huge part of every company. PlayStation, Microsoft, Nintendo, even PC companies like AMD and stuff are constantly trying to experiment. They're doing very expensive stuff in the lab to try and push the boundaries and, I mean, let's face it, push their profit margins. So the idea that it seems like, fully finished at least the prototypes of the Nintendo Switch Pro and then threw them in the garbage can, I guess to me, I'm so curious to see what those would have been and how big of a leap are we going to get with the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, I've made some videos about this in the past, but personally, I hope the Nintendo Switch 2 is a big technical leap. I'm not asking it to be a PlayStation 5 in your pocket or something, but I hope it is as close as possible to the power of something like the Steam Deck. I seriously am obsessed with my Steam Deck. I was playing my Steam Deck all freaking day yesterday and having an absolute blast with it. I think it would be cool if, I mean, honestly, just better frame rate. The weirdness is about the Nintendo Switch situation as it currently exists is the fact that Nintendo is making such good exclusives. The Nintendo Switch, even as it currently exists, has a bunch of very popular exclusives. Stuff like Animal Crossing has, I mean, literally billions of play hours among the community. Splatoon 3, which just seems like a very random game, had incredibly high sales numbers. I mean, I think it's very admirable to think about the fact that, I mean, these things are so big and so popular. So as I am so curious to see, what are we going to see? Like, what is the Nintendo Switch 2 going to be like? In my mind, I think the most obvious answer is just more Nintendo Switch. Still portable, still have these cool, easy to snap off controllers. I mean, still just the same gimmick of dropping it into a dock. Just give us better graphics, less load times, and hopefully a little bit more stable frame rate than some of the stuff that happened in Pokemon. Give me games that actually have 60 frames a second, or even more than that. It seems like Tears of the Kingdom, there's still so much freaking hype and mystery about the next Zelda game. If they release that game, which does just kind of look fantastic, and then the next year when we get the Nintendo Switch 2, suddenly it gets an update patch that lets it run at like 90 or 100 frames a second, to me, that sounds epic. Or even being able to play a Zelda game at actual 4K. I mean, That sounds epic. But what do you guys think about this? How do you feel about the Nintendo Switch Pro finally being put to bed? I mean, this is definitely dead, dead, dead. At least that's the way it sounds like from some very reputable sources. Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a big old thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already, and please keep dreaming. Oh man, finally, we are free from the curse of the Switch Pro. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.